Well, I think we're waiting for some more people to pop on, but I think we can go ahead and get started, like to reward people who are on time, right?
There you go.
Started. But welcome to our online Blue Knot speaker series. We're so excited to have this event, the new business environment for startups. So lucky to have Aaron Perman and Steve Schaffer and JD Weinstein with us tonight to speak to us. You've all been chatting a little bit with them, and they are actually going to introduce themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to them to get started.
Well, glad. So we're going to keep this as informal as we can, if you will. Interrupt us, ask questions anytime. I'm sure everybody will. We all like to give back and like to share kind of different experiences. I'm an entrepreneur by training, if you will. If you keep starting enough businesses, eventually one of them works. That's kind of my motto. My last business, I had a nice exit about 4 years ago. I sold my company offers.com to a public company, Ziff Davis. Actually, they're a division of a public company. And since that time, I took a year off. I've done some nonprofit work. And now I'm really a full-time mentor, advisor, investor, and I'm on a couple of boards. And I do, like on a day like today, I had office hours, and yesterday I had some office hours. And I just basically meet with a lot of entrepreneurs and ask questions, give them some advice, and also do some angel investing. Who wants to go next? Oh, and I went to UT, so I'll just go a little bit further back. I went to UT and spent 15 years in San Francisco. And then when I was growing my last company, I moved here in December of 2003 because I was bootstrapping it, and I don't really think San Francisco is a great place to bootstrap a business. I thought Austin would be much better, and I was right. It worked out really well.
Great. I'm happy to jump in. So Aaron Perman, I'm a vice president at S3 Ventures. So we are the largest venture firm that's in Texas and focused on Texas. So mostly investing in Texas-based companies, and we have the purview of investing in companies at the seed stage. So I think companies that typically have a product and maybe some early revenue, all the way up for companies that are doing, Series A or B stages, so millions in revenue. And then, we have a couple of companies in our portfolio that we've kind of invested along the way that are, almost kind of pre-public. So lots of experiences with businesses from, 5 people to 500 people. I've been doing this for 7 years, so spent a fair amount of time in the venture world, both leading investments and sitting on boards and working with companies post-investment. Before S3, I spent a few years investing as a long-short equity investor on the public markets, and then I started my career out in corporate strategy at a large power company. But really, my passion for entrepreneurship is really from in my earliest days working at startups through internships, and then running some of my own businesses for a number of years, lifestyle businesses, where learned the visceral pain of cash flow, but also the success that can come when you can go figure that out. So, and then at S3, I've spent a bunch of time on the operational side of the table in addition to investing. So in any case, that's my background, and looking forward to, the discussion tonight.
Right on. Hi, y'all. I'm JD Weinstein. I'm excited to be in presence with Steve and Aaron here, and good to meet some of you and see some familiar faces as well. I'm wearing a jacket because Aaron's background made me a little chilly here, so no one can say anything else. So I'm also a supporter of startups like the other folks on the call. And currently I lead a division at Oracle, a large technology company in town, if you're unfamiliar, in helping run our startup program. So really helping startups leverage all Oracle resources, our technology, our customer base, and other things to succeed and scale to the next level. So we do that across North America. The rest of my team covers the rest of the world. And before that, I've just done various roles with sort of alternative venture funds and investing in startups. So one was with WPP, a large advertising conglomerate. Capital Factory, an accelerator that some of y'all might be familiar with here in town, and then also University of Texas. So hook 'em horns. Yeah, excited to be here with y'all.
Awesome. Awesome. So we kind of did some introductions at first. What we thought we would do is just run through a couple of the topics that we shared in the email, kind of have a free-form discussion about it, and then open it up to questions or discussion. And if anyone wants if something spurs a question, feel free to jump in. But the first one, and I'm gonna ask it, so I'm gonna let one of you guys answer it, and then we'll kind of trade around. But I'm going to add something to it, which is what's the biggest surprise you've seen from what's going on in the last kind of 7-8 months with COVID, and how do you think startups need to adjust based on what's going on? I don't know if one of you want to jump in on that one.
Yeah, a curveball. No, you know what's interesting about the surprise? In some ways, I think it's been interesting how some industries have been heavily impacted, and other industries not as much. I think, you look at historical patterns predict the future, and there sometimes are asset bubbles that kind of burst, but rarely have you seen a time where some industries are just so much more heavily impacted than others. And I think we've seen that in our portfolio with our companies where the whether COVID impacted them in either benefited or harmed them really was heavily correlated to their end markets and their customer base. And I think the interesting thing is a lot of the customer bases for a lot of software companies, if you didn't have a lot of vertical concentration, your growth may have slowed a little bit, budgets got tighter, you may have lost a quarter and a half. I think, Rachel, as you were talking about there earlier, there was kind of a pause, but we've seen a lot of that pause start to come back now. And so, unless you sold into like the wedding industry or, physical events or things like that, if you had a wide swath of Fortune 500 customers, for the most part, we're not seeing companies fully churn if you had heavy usage of the software. And so the way I kind of think about that is if you were installed, you were using it, which is like a great metric for a healthy enterprise software business anyways, your customers are mostly still there, but maybe not expanding, or there's a little budgetary pressure. If you're in an industry that helped remote work get done, I mean, wow, you had a rocket ship. And while I think that may not continue forever, I think there were trends that were accelerated that are going to benefit you for a long time. And then, even in some of the industries that were less resilient, I think we're starting to see them come back. I would say on the consumer side, what's been interesting, is we have some companies that kind of touch the media space, which initially, like all ad budgets, just got placed on hold. We've seen a lot of that come back, and I think consumers have been surprisingly resilient, especially at the middle and upper end of the market where a lot of these tech companies sell into. So I think, frankly, that's been surprising. Who knows what the future holds, but I expected things to be much worse, candidly, than they are today.
Yeah, certainly all surprising in my brain, right, with everything happened. But I think to Aaron's point, it's been really interesting to look at the industries that have really been disrupted and other ones that maybe would not have thought bounced back, right, roaring back very quickly. And so a good use case of just looking at how the environment changes is, folks on the call are probably familiar with Airbnb, and following them, right, early on in sort of the lockdown periods, right, very unsure if they're going to make it. So laid off, like many companies did, a quarter, actually a lot more than a quarter of their whole workforce, really prepping for the worst. And then fast forward to a couple of months ago, they have beat every single record that they've ever had, right? So folks are starting to travel and drive within 100 miles and want to, go on weekend getaways, but don't want to stay in hotels. So it is really important to just keep eyes open for how fast the world's shifting. I think, Steve, that the other point, one thing that I've learned at Oracle, working with a lot of business to business selling companies, is a lot more people are going to look into not only how to COVID proof their businesses, which is what I think a lot of the discussions and things that we've been having around the last couple of months are, and to make a new investment, but also like, how do I look for COVID proof customers in a sense? And you can't be perfect at that, but I think that's like a major insight of, okay, actually the sustainability comes from, are my investors COVID proof, or my customers, or my shareholders, so on and so forth. Another, I think, sort of like the obvious thing, right, to look at is every CEO or CFO has a giant spreadsheet of all their existing software spend, or any spend, right, with weighted rankings. At least all the really good ones do, right? And so vendors below a specific line, I know Aaron's probably evaluated some of this with some of the businesses they invest in. Below a specific line because of poor experiences, or they aren't essential, are cut, right? So I think the big thing now more than ever, you've got to demonstrate why you're essentially above this bottom line.
Yeah, I think, either cut or just, used but not paid. And so if you're selling into companies, you want to make sure what they need is pretty critical, and that if you turn it off, it would hurt them, because when push comes to shove, employees always get paid. Contractors generally get paid, but software vendors, you can really get so paid. And we have seen enterprises use this, fortunately, even companies like Amazon, or Walmart, as an excuse to pay even slower than they already do. One other end market that's been surprising is that healthcare has really been hurt on the medical device side of things, where people are still postponing non-emergency procedures. So it's like a tale of two worlds, where if you do something that somehow touches COVID in healthcare, your business is on fire. If you're in COVID diagnostics, or even making IV bags along IV lines, but if you're make implantable hips, or other things for procedures that are medically necessary but not urgent, you've seen a real decline in your business, and I'm sure there'll be pent-up demand for in 6 months, but you're having to manage through that.
What's interesting to me about that is that there's some businesses that there was this estimated 20-year adoption cycle that was planned, and some of that the adoption was almost overnight. There's been talk about things like, online training or virtual training. Not just Peloton took off, but I know gyms that are not planning to ever reopen again. They've gone completely virtual. They decided after 2 weeks of doing the virtual training that they could make more money by doing virtual training by not having to do the driving or going places. It was easier to do multiple people at a time. It was fascinating. Restaurants that really embraced pickup have really, really thrived. It's quite amazing to think about. The restaurant industry in some ways was devastated, but some of them have just thrived.
Yeah,
I think the one that's
that actually, what are your, kind of looking at all of these things, how do you think about how businesses need to either, pivot or evaluate pivoting, or change to either, survive or thrive in this environment?
I was telling companies really early on that you've got to make short-term, really quick decisions without a lot of knowledge of what's going to happen, but don't assume that it's just going to come roaring back. I mean, I had those conversations in March, and really, really need to be decisive about your leadership. And I know a lot of companies that did that. I've got some friends that managed through that very well. What was the most fascinating were the people who just started businesses as a result of what went on. I know a software company that got started that essentially is doing, you check in for, at a construction site, you check in that you're there. And it started literally, someone needed the feature added to a product. A product was built, a company was built, and it's just so amazing. The number of telemedicine companies that have come up and are making progress. I mean, if you had said to me, would my mom ever do a doctor's visit on her phone, I would have been like, no way, impossible. And now she's done multiple doctor's visits on her phone. And I heard someone on the news saying today, they're not sure they're going to go back to the doctor for routine things. They're going to completely transitioned to telemedicine. And I actually think that's really kind of fascinating. So I think from a pivot standpoint, I know like my kids can't wait for it all to be over and everything to go back to normal. But I don't know that we're going to get back to what we would have thought normal was when we do get back. I think there's a lot of stuff that's going to be permanent. Hopefully all the good stuff and not the bad stuff, but.
Yeah, there's a lot of, one of the cool things is businesses like a Shopify or BigCommerce is one in town are been able to, folks that have businesses that are selling physical things, overnight within a day could set up a really robust system to sell their stuff locally and all around the world and take payments and deal with logistics and shipping. And there's a lot of different, companies that address that. I think that's the biggest one, right? Is I'd say when we talk about like the digital adoption curve being sped up by 10 years, like this is all over the place. I think especially in the world of, telemedicine and e-commerce.
No, that makes sense. I think the way I think about it is that even with the digital adoption curve sped up, that's going to speed up things for like the convenience things that people don't want to do anyway, like shop or sign something or things like that. I don't think the world's going to go totally virtual or remote where people don't ever meet in person again, though. And this is a prediction with no data, so take it for what it's worth. But I think there will be more people working remotely because we proved that we can do it. But I don't think the value of having people in the office around a conference room, table together or traveling to meet face to face has gone away completely. What I do see though is, for instance, we had an investment in a company called Live Oak that helped financial institutions do business digitally, and DocuSign acquired them during this. And so, I think DocuSign's seen rapid e-signature adoption, and that's something where who wants to sign a piece of paper physically? I think you're going to see things like remote notary where you can notarize things remotely. Because again, who wants to drive to the bank to notarize a document in person? But I think those are the sort of lower value transactional or day-to-day might go away, but I don't think we're going to live in a world where all we ever do is walk from our bedroom to our living room and get on a laptop and walk back to our bedroom. That's a very sad world to me.
Let's hope not. But do you think people will still, you used to get on a plane and spend an entire, to go have lunch with someone, for instance, right? You might fly somewhere, go have a 1 hour meeting and fly back. Well, that's one of the ones I'm wondering, will that kind of travel just be done? And, because I totally can see conferences coming back and, large scale events where you get a lot of bang for your buck. But I wonder about that flying for that short meeting. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, this is why. Go ahead.
So let me ask just a follow on to that question. That's one thing that's interesting. And that is when your sales team has only contact through a computer or through email instead of person to person, that's my biggest question. And granted, I'm a generation ahead of you guys, or older than you guys, but that conversation that you have before and after the meeting, the severe it should bring relationship has always been important. Is it still, and is that gonna change? Particularly like fly in, have a sales meeting, have a conversation out. What does that do?
Yeah,
I think go ahead, Steve.
To repeat what Joe asked, because his audio is not so great, doing so well tonight, is the sales meeting. I think he's asking will that still happen? I think that yes and no. I think that that trainings will, a lot of customer service and trainings and like support functions will absolutely be more likely to be online, even more so as more technology is developed. But I think that once things do come back to some sense of in-person, I think there's a lot of salespeople who are going to want to get back on the road and go see customers again. But I think there's a lot of companies that are going to revisit their travel budgets and their entertainment budgets and look at what was accomplished without it during COVID, and start to question some of that. Especially some of the really expensive trips that perhaps people were going on.
Yeah. I'd say one observation is that enterprise selling during COVID has been interesting because in some ways, the initial reaction is the world's ended. I can't meet my customer in person. But in some ways, people have actually been a little more successful because everyone's not traveling and doing things and it is long meetings. And so I think we're in a different environment that, yes, where people are finding ways to close business without traveling, but it's also a short-term thing where a lot of those relationships are already some relationships with champions and decision makers maybe built in person before this. And just it's easier to get in people's calendars right now. And so I think that when the world returns to normal and people get busier and it's harder to get on calendars, you might see some reversion to the mean. And, in the span of 6, 7, 8, 9 months, you still have a lot of similar people. But as you start to see org changes and just more time, you maybe have to go back out to build those relationships again. So I wouldn't be surprised if some the number of trips to close a deal might go from 3 to 1 or 3 to 2 or something like that, where you can do some more of it remotely. But I think there's other factors at play that have allowed sales to be successful remotely. It's not something you can look at in a vacuum just because there's so many different things that are different about that process right now.
There's that. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, one of the related questions to that for one, I want to get your guys' thoughts on this too, is that we really quickly, we didn't go from meetings to phone calls. We went right to Zoom, right? Or Hangouts or whatever it might be. And then there was a little bit of period of Zoom fatigue. And then it seemed like people went back to really enjoying, doing the video meetings. And I wonder when things get back to some sense of normal, whether it'll go back to, doing your one-on-ones over the phone instead of on Zoom, whether it'll be either in person or phone, or whether, a Zoom meeting will still be a thing. I've thought a little bit about that, and I've kind of gone back and forth on my thoughts. What do you guys think?
What's interesting is if you have a Zoom account and the snap-in's built into Outlook, it's so seamless. We don't have to go look up what their phone number is to put it in the location field. I could see that happening just because Zoom's grown their install base, or Teams or whatever. Everyone has Outlook snap-in now. That could be one of those COVID acceleration things where it just becomes like second nature. And Google does that with Google Meets if you're a G Suite user. But I don't know. What about you, JD? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy, right? Practically overnight, Zoom, which was video conferencing tools, became a magic show platform. Everyone started doing weddings on it. It's the largest personal training infrastructure now. Every single industry, this video platform powers. I think definitely we go back to the sense of balance with it. I think it'll be integrated much more into our lives, but certainly I don't know about you all. I'm certainly missing some personal interaction and touch and hugging and all the interpersonal stuff that we used to do. An interesting thing that I like to really brainstorm and talk about, it's fun to sort of sit around and predict what's going to happen in the future. And are people going to go back into the office or not? Is it going to be a hybrid model? And the other thing, which in a second, I'm curious to hear both Steve and Aaron your thoughts as investors when you're looking at businesses in the new normal. What we like to look at is sure things. So the pet industry, for example, if I think you all are mostly all in Austin here, every animal shelter is empty, right? So everyone's got pets, and I don't think everyone's going to give up their pets as soon as COVID ends. Going back to the office, debatable, we'll see what happens. But there are different types of businesses and industries that we for sure know are going to be changed, and the demand will stay really high, right? Especially when we talk about climate change, so on and so forth. I'll kick that back to y'all. I'm curious to hear.
That brings up a really interesting one on the pets. When people do start going out of the office, doggy daycare.
There you go.
That's going to explode very, very quickly. So anyone's looking for a business, there's one for you.
Yeah, SoftBank's wag timing may not have been good.
Yeah, just missed it.
Debbie, did you have a question there, Debbie?
Oh, yeah, I was good. I'm a pet lover. You may see my dogs jump in my lap here if you want to. But I was going to address the hybrid model, and I'm so sorry I didn't actually introduce myself for those of you that I haven't met. I own 6 mental health clinics, 5 of them in the Austin area, 1 is in Houston, and we make mental health accessible. That is our motto. And so when the pandemic hit, we shut down like everybody else kind of for a couple of weeks, and I kind of thought I was going to lose my business because the insurance companies did not tell us they would pay for telehealth. They waited a few weeks, tortured us. I don't mean us personally, but nationwide, it was a big issue. And then finally, when they came through saying, yes, we'll pay for telehealth, then my business came back like with a vengeance. And we are so busy because now people are so stressed, very stressed. So we've already talked about what we're going to do. We're going to have a hybrid model. We think there's some clients who are craving that interpersonal connection, the people that live alone or who are isolated. They want to be in person as soon as they can. And then there are some people who love the convenience of the telehealth model. They love that they don't have to drive across Austin. It used to be a lot of traffic in Austin, and now the traffic has gone down. That's a silver lining. But now they prefer just, hey, I can just click and 2 minutes, walk over to my computer and have the session and not have to commute or take time off of work. So we believe we're going to have the hybrid model. That's something we're already predicting for the mental health field.
And on the mental health one, I know that I'm hearing from especially the college age kids, they're in a world of hurt right now. Are you meeting with any college kids? Because I wonder what that means when things do get back to normal, both from
yeah, it's all ages that are affected. I mean, these kids in elementary school and high school are not adjusting that well to remote learning. Then you've got the college kids who are either getting ready to graduate, or maybe they graduated in May and they couldn't be launched, like they couldn't go get a job. So there's a lot of problems with what's happened this year. There's been a lot of setbacks for a lot of people. Yeah, we see all ages though.
That is an important one, and I see that not going anywhere, but continuing to skyrocket up. And unfortunately, I know. On the mental health piece, just a slide askew, and I don't want to bring this too much in the conversation, but highly recommend watching the film The Social Dilemma for those of y'all with kids, especially. I know some people are like, but an important one just to understand, right? People that are especially younger generations that have nothing to compare it to on screen time, 10, 11, 12 hours a day. When we're talking about being able to learn and play with other kids, like this is, going to be a major point to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So I say, Aaron and Steve, what do you think about, but like, I wanted to flip over to you all, because I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, if I'm going to fundraise for my company or I'm starting a new thing, what are potentially, like, one, what does funding look like, but also, on a tangent, what does COVID proofing my business look like? Curious to hear your minds about that.
I'll share my thoughts on funding, because there was definitely a 6 weeks of, I would call it frozen, but it thawed really fast. I know that most people just wanted to wait and see what happened with the world, with the economy, with valuations. I know there was talk, valuations are going to go down. I heard today, based on the latest data, valuations for private companies are up. I'd love to hear if Aaron agrees with that. I know, and I remember I forgot which VC it was that I talked to, but they were bragging in like April that they had done their first, or maybe it was May, their first all Zoom funding. Like they met for the first time on Zoom and closed on Zoom and never met in person. And I remember back in March and April, some VCs and some investors saying they wouldn't invest. They had a policy of not investing in a company unless they met in person. And it was amazing how quickly, because what do you, that just went out the window. And I think it's the most fascinating thing from an opportunity standpoint. I think it's never been easier to get a meeting with someone. Nobody's traveling, nobody's going on vacation. You pretty much know that everybody's, not everybody, but most investors are checking their email. I think in some cases, the number of deals getting done per meeting is down, but the number of deals might be up. So it might look like it's easier, but in some ways it's harder to raise money now because there's still the same amount of money chasing the same amount of deals. But since it's easier to get a meeting now, I think that changes the perception a bit.
So, yeah, so we've done 2 deals all on Zoom so far this year. One, I can't really say never met them because we had known the founder before, and so we had met him in person, just not in the context of this investment. The other one, though, went from first meeting on Zoom to close without having ever met him in person. You know, I would say the observation is right. The 6 week after, you know, candidly, no one knew it was going to happen, and we were also stinking busy with our portfolio company, figuring out like working with them on a replan, figuring out if they were going to be impacted, if they were working through, if they were, you know, were gonna reduce expenses, what that was going to look like. And then right after we finished all that, we all got slapped in the face with the PPP loans and figuring out who could get one and how that was going to work. And so, you know, there was a good 6 weeks of kind of just pandemonium. And then after that, it was just like quiet for a week or two. Then we started seeing some new investments. And I think, you know, in those 6 weeks or in those 8 weeks, you're really in like March, April, May, really the only companies that were attempting to raise money were companies that couldn't afford not to raise money. And usually the companies that are in really strong shape, especially in the mid to later stages, you know, are raising money when they still have some time period where they'd be able to push their fundraise off if they wanted to. But, you know, fast forward to today, and I think we're back to a level of deal volume that we were pre-pandemic. You know, I think at this point, a lot of businesses can fairly accurately as any startup ever could, put down a plan and say, hey, we think for our business, this is what we're going to do in the next 12 months, which is probably the thing that was most important to us. And yeah, I mean, we're seeing the same level of competition and valuations we were going to see before. You know, I would say the diligence process probably takes, you know, on average 30% longer. It's just the richness of communication you get over Zoom is lower than in person. It's really, really hard to sit in a room for 6 hours in person. It's a lot harder over Zoom, and so sessions get broken up into smaller time frames. But I think Steve's points on accessibility, to get a meeting now is easier than ever if you know who to contact. Kind of like when we were talking about enterprise sales. You know, before this, even though we're Texas focused, I was probably traveling at least every other week, but I would not uncommon for it to be a day or 2 weeks sometimes. And so, you know, schedule are tighter now. You know, spending less time on planes, there's more time to meet with people, but you don't have that haphazard meeting someone at a happy hour or a networking event. And so you just have to be more intentional about you know, reaching out to people cold or getting introduced and kind of, you know, working that angle. But yeah, I think, you know, at this point, the majority of at least venture investors are writing checks. And I think with angel investors and really early stage capital, you know, part of the dip you saw in March and April was correlated to their public equity investments going down. Well, equities are back up and people are feeling, you know, wealthy. And I think with angel investors, that tends to be more cyclical to the appetite to invest, the overall economic condition. Well, venture investors, yeah, there is some cyclicality, but it's like delayed by a few years. We've already raised committed funds, so when there's a crash, there's still capital to deploy, and so you know, valuations may change, but there's still capital out there. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, now that there's still an opportunity to raise money, different format, but the floodgates are, you know, fairly open.
Well, it's definitely a trailing indicator. We're interested. I'm very interested. So at Oracle, because it's such a large company, looking at what's going to happen with our retail business around the holidays, what's going to come up right now, I think is going to be a really big sort of testament of what to expect in the next year, at least early on. I think all this stuff happening is the prime example of, you know, always have 9, 12, 18 months of cash in the bank, right? Because you now know, if you didn't before, there are all sorts of unexpected things that happen. And Aaron going through that timeline was really interesting because as a venture capitalist, on his end, it's interesting, I think, as I talked to lots of VCs, I could tell in the very beginning, it was full on what they called portfolio triage. So just making sure all their current investments are still going to make it. And so that's why, right, you saw it plummet for like a month when all that was being figured out. But as soon as things started to nook through, right, the venture market really came roaring back. The other point that's sort of an interesting topic to talk about is just, you know, so you're doing virtual deals, does that change how you're evaluating deals, right? And I think the earlier you go, so much of it is betting on the team and team dynamics and a gut, and you know, not knowing them face to face. Like, how does that change? Do you maybe look at metrics like you have higher check marks that they've got to hit, or you know, are you able to pick up some nonverbal communication, other things over video? Like, what do y'all's feel on that?
Yeah, I mean, team's just more vital. Team's always vital, but the notch was definitely raised. And it's not even for just investing. It's, yeah, I'm in the process of hiring someone right now for our team. And, you know, whereas before we might look at someone that's, you know, a junior role with, you know, 2, 3, 4 years of work experience, who might take a chance on someone with 18 months. Now I'm looking for someone with 3 to 6 years, because I want someone that, you know, just onboarding and training people is harder right now. So yeah, I think the bar is higher on, you know, whereas before maybe you would have taken more of a chance on someone, but really having comfort of your ability to work together is just really, really important. You know, the other thing that was interesting in that time frame was the efficacy of the you know, the big CARES Act. I think that was shockingly effective. You know, maybe there's plenty of stuff that could have been done better, but for something that was done in, you know, divided government in like a month, that was shockingly effective at putting money into consumers' pockets quickly and putting money into businesses' pockets with the PPP loans. Like, those really did have an impact on some of our companies, you know, avoiding layoffs. And you know, there are definitely companies in ours that said, hey, if I get this, I'm not going to lay anyone off. And if I don't, we're going to have to think about other things. And so, and then things weren't as bad. And frankly, it's been, you know, beneficial for them to have it, but it really did save a bunch of jobs. And so you look at, you know, I think at this point, most of that stimulus money, both the PPP money and the consumer side, has probably been spent. And, you know, depending on how long it takes to return to normalcy and what even more divided government looks like, I think you might be interested to see. It's really hard to know how that's going to impact the business environment, which can ripple into the startup environment. You know, as consumers affect enterprises affect startup vendors, et cetera, or if you're selling consumer software, you know, directly in the coming, you know, quarter or two. Because I think, like, we bizarrely enough in the middle of COVID, like in June, like July or August, something like the lowest levels of poverty and people, you know, of credit card debt that we've had in a while. And that doesn't make any sense right now. And it's not correlated to reality. It's correlated to temporary money, the $1,200 checks and the $600 enhanced unemployment that has since been kind of gone away.
So what kind of questions do y'all have that we can help you with? They can be, as you know, we've got a small group, so they can be as general as you want, or as specific if you've got something real specific you want to touch on.
So I'm wondering, with startup activity, how to formulate a corporate culture sitting in your living room, looking at someone in someone's living room.
You know, I've actually seen some companies do a really good job of that. I know of a couple that I'm an investor in that went and started doing online happy hours. And, you know, it doesn't always have to be around alcohol. I saw one, there was a company that did escape rooms that pivoted and they became, you know, virtual online escape. And I did one of those with one of the companies over the summer, and it was surprisingly fun because it was on Zoom, but, you know, the host was there in a real room going and doing what you wanted. And I think it just required a lot more intention and a lot more thought. I think companies that are for startups, for existing companies, I think it was easier because your core values are already set. But for a startup company, there was a lot more thinking had to go into it.
Yeah, we've seen some companies be fantastically intentional around culture. And in some ways, you see some companies that maybe weren't as intentional and being remote drove them to be intentional because of the informal kind of communications, went away. And so I've seen companies do everything from people getting together in a park and doing things there to companies that send a sourced cocktail and a cheese plate to you for everyone to kind of get together, and then we'll play games or solve puzzles over Zoom together. And so you've seen some of those interactions that you wouldn't ordinarily see, or even companies might other ways. We have one portfolio company that their customer success manager is a big Taylor Swift fan, and so every time they get a 5-star review, part of the and they're all about really want to help their customers, and so 5-star reviews are like, go to them and they post another Taylor Swift picture on the wall. Well, they got 2,000 of these, and they did a video of the reviews and montages, and they have multiple offices here and one abroad, and they had people participating in the video, and they spliced in clips of Taylor Swift music and kind of spliced her together, in fair use, of course, kind of 15-second increments. And that became a really cool thing to honor their culture of delighting customers and helping customers get what they're owed, and kind of celebrating something that was physical and making it virtual. So we've seen stuff like that candidly, there wasn't the level of intentionality put into it before COVID, but it's actually become someone's job to focus on it now, given we're remote and it's just hard to do it informally.
Very last second, I'll put on that. There's all sorts of cool things with musical talents and trivia and things you can do. I think people that are feeling the hell are many times like your mid-level or otherwise managers, where it was a lot easier to rally up a team and to have group meetings and so on and so forth. I found that folks that are doing kind of the individual contributor work are taking this time a lot better, but folks that are used to talking to folks all day long, answering questions and picking up the rapport, you have to get creative. There's just sort of no other way around it. What other questions y'all have?
I wanted to give a comment. You just mentioned individual contributor, and you guys have been talking about startups and leaders. I tell you that it's been interesting. I'm working right now as a contractor for Pfizer at the moment.
Oh.
And
Congratulations.
Not an employee.
Okay, I know. I'm just
to be clear here. I get to watch the flowers. I don't get to smell the flowers.
Right. There you go.
But one of the things that I think is huge and difficult, and for which maybe there's a Sherpa type opportunity, is all the people that are being onboarded who are junior. I'm not talking about people with 5, 10, 20 years experience. I'm talking about the people that need to learn their skills, and this is the time for them to learn it. And they're coming on board, and instead of being able to wander down to the break room and find 4 people from 4 different departments and start to make those interpersonal connections, nothing personal, Zoom and WebEx, they actually don't cut it for anything other than focused communication. I don't know if any of you tried to do a Kabbalat Shabbat or any kind of Seder or anything involving people trying to do things together. Yeah, no. So it would be interesting to hear you guys address it both from an opportunity and from how do we, Debbie, what's your take on it as well?
Yeah, one of the themes that that I had identified, a year ago as one that I was interested in investing in. It didn't really have a name before COVID, and now it does. It's called the future of work. And I've seen in the last 3 months, it's probably the most prominent pitch I've seen. How to get a job, how to keep a job, how to get a promotion. I've seen no less than a half dozen startups that are all that started up during or just before COVID that are kind of tackling some of those issues. And I think one of them is actually going to be doing training, and they're building a platform. Now, initially they're going to use Zoom, but long term they're looking at having to build their own technology, because Zoom, like if we had 40 people here, we still as leaders want to see the audience, but Zoom's not really designed for that kind of thing. There's going to be new companies and new technologies that come out of this. There are that take advantage of some of that. So yeah, I would agree with you. I think what's happened is because we've shown we're willing to try to solve the problem with these alternative technologies. Now I do agree with you. I think there's an opportunity for new solutions to come in that are better equipped. I'm not sure I would back the Shabbat or Passover Seder solutions, but perhaps there's one that comes up that can address that as part of its being a better solution than Zoom.
Yeah, Debbie, what do you think? I'm curious because of what she does for a living.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, we all crave the interpersonal connection. And our clinicians just got together last Sunday at one of our Austin city parks. Big picnic table, all spread out. It was really safe. And that's the first time I'd seen my employees since March. I mean, we were all just like, we've got to get together. And, some people opted out, which was fine. It was an optional gathering, but we all crave that interpersonal connection of some sort. So yeah, Zoom's not going to make it for everybody. But I actually came on this meeting because I'm looking at a business opportunity that's kind of outside my scope a little bit. It's more in the tech field. I have an idea for a business more tech related, app related option, and I don't need funding. I just kind of need coaching or guidance on like, what do you do first? Like, do you present the idea, or do you go hire the tech person to kind of work out the bugs to see if it even is going to work? So that's my big question.
So your question is, where do you start, huh?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've met with a friend who's not also in the tech, and we've gone and talked, and I'm like, okay, neither one of us knows where to start with this. So
yeah. Well, my thought, and I always like to see ideas that started with a problem, right? So what is the problem we're trying to solve? And the one that an investor will often ask is, why are you the best one to solve that problem? Right.
Well, I don't need an investor is what I'm trying to tell you. I'm not looking for angel investing or anything like that.
Right. But to me, it's often the same question, whether you're bootstrapping or whether you're getting an investor, right? Because if you have the idea, there's a reasonable chance somebody else did.
Correct.
So the question is how are you going to differentiate, or how are you going to be better? What happens if, Mark has the same exact idea? Why can you win? And again, it's a question that investors ask, but even if you don't get outside investors, then you're the investor. So in my opinion, you should treat yourself as the investor in that respect and still try to answer some of those same questions.
Yeah. There is a book I'm going to post called Disciplined Entrepreneurship. It's a good book. I'm going to post it in here. And it definitely is in a framework of thinking about, technology-enabled businesses. And it has, so everyone has an opinion. And so take what you want that's useful, and what you don't want, ignore it. But, it's thinking about like a place to start. It has some good thoughts around, if you're thinking of building a technology company, how to think about these points, the market, the potential product, what the economics could be. And kind of start with feasibility of, let's assume the technology works, will the business work? What's the market for it? How do the economics look? Is it the type of thing I could scale into something big if you're going that direction? And then hopefully start to think about product, start problem to product. And then once you kind of have some of that mapped out, that maybe gives you something to think about, how do you build a minimally viable product? How can you test it? Because what you may find, depending on what it is maybe you don't need to go build a bunch of technology to test it. Maybe you can find a way. A lot of businesses you can sort of test out and that became technology companies with, Excel or Google Docs or Airtable or Zoom. There are ways to kind of build technology where you're not actually technologists. Looks like there are humans in the background, and have a couple customers try it and figure out from the customers. Is the experience good? Did they get value out of it? What would they pay for it? And then kind of incrementally build additional things. And then you may be at the point where to Steve's point, you're not raising any money outside, but you're investing your time and effort in it, where you hit the point where it says, hey, I know enough to know this is viable now because I've tested it and things that'll be like it. And now is the time to go find, maybe a technical co-founder or a senior technical person that can help me sort of go from, Trello boards and off-the-shelf stuff stitched together to having, an initial kind of your own built product. That might be one way I might think about it.
Thank you. Okay.
One more resource that's pretty cool is called the Lean Startup methodology that just really helps you map a lot of things out. It's not necessarily the ultimate and the only framework for anyone, but a very good one that helps you sort of think and plan about, right? How are we getting our early customers? How do we sort of rework and pivot? Oh, there's our real coworker there. So yeah, the Lean Startup is another good one to check out.
Okay.
And one thing to be careful of that I've seen, I saw this very early in COVID. I do these weekly or monthly office hours through Capital Factory, and there was a 2-week period where I had 3 different companies come and tell me that they had a great solution for doing online restaurant orders. And it was like they were the first one to come up with it. And one guy had spent $150,000 having someone build this solution that he had to do all the marketing and all the email management and it was really fascinating because I felt bad for the guy because he hadn't really stopped and talked to a customer to find out, is that what they wanted, right? And tried to build it himself first to see what it might look like, right? Even if it's just drawing some screens on a piece of paper on what the different screens are that you want the product to do. But there's a lot, that would be my point, if you would. See, the dog agrees. Be careful you can't just say, I've got this idea and just go hire a developer or development company to go build it. It's really to use the books and the resources and some of those methodologies to think through, what is it that you're really trying to accomplish? And sometimes you just got to just start and go do it, right? I know plenty of people at all ages that have had the idea and then they just go teach themselves basic programming because it's easier to get it out of their brain and into a computer screen than to try to tell somebody else about it too.
Yeah, the cool thing though is with all the tools out there like Airtable and Google Forms, like you can build a surprising amount now without knowing any programming. That looks to an outside observer like you're kind of faking product, and then you, the human, are doing what the product will do in the background. But yeah, I mean, the other thing I'd say is I always look at like business success as 99% execution, 1% idea. And so I see it that with a lot of times people that kind of have an idea, they're almost like afraid to tell people the idea. But if you're afraid to tell people the idea, you're not going to be able to get any feedback from customers. And ultimately, they're the people that you need to tell your idea to get feedback. And so what I would say is if you have a really good idea and you think it's an exciting market, well, like that's great, but I wouldn't worry about, telling customers and people like that your idea to get feedback from them at least, because candidly, they're not going to have your industry expertise or your know-how to necessarily execute it. And usually great teams that can really build things, even if their initial idea isn't great, they'll go pivot and figure out something really good. And teams that aren't strong, it doesn't really matter how good their idea is. It's just not going to go anywhere.
That is for sure.
Let me throw one more thing into the conversation, Debbie. Something to consider, and this is all really good feedback. What is it that you want out of the company or the idea that you're developing? Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to, build a company that'll support, a happy lifestyle in Austin, that is a completely different problem than if you're trying to build a platform that's going to scale and unicorn itself. So, something to think about. Everybody's feedback about finding the right problem and validating that is spot on. But one other thing to throw into the mix is, what is it that you want to build?
That's a great comment. We've got time for maybe one or two more questions. Maybe we'll do speed questions. So if anyone's got a really quick question.
I don't know if it's a speed question, but I'll try. Kind of like a little like behind the curtain question. So if you will, building a company right now, and we're doing the whole COVID thing where investors that we've never met invested, customers never met that have purchased, building a team that we've never met before. So like now when you think about that and you're a potential customer or investor of ours, like, is that something that we're supposed to just pretend like COVID didn't happen? Or is it one of those things where you actually tell the story of like, hey, we've never met and we're all working together? So I'm just like kind of curious to hear your take on that.
No, I don't have a great answer. That's a funny question. I never thought about that actually. I think with an investor, they'll naturally piece together the timeline and know. I think the funny thing is, like, at least with investors, we're seeing more and more remote companies. And like, GitLab was an anomaly in that they're a multi-thousand person, super successful, 100% remote company, and they meet up everywhere, 3-4, it used to be 4 times a year, now twice a year. But in some ways, we're having to get comfortable because all of our companies are hiring remotely. I mean, their business doesn't just stand still. And so, I don't know if that's something you even have to tell someone, because I think in some ways it's kind of just assumed. And I think candidly, if you can deliver the value you need to deliver, like, why does your customer even care? That's my 2 cents.
This comes back to like the idea where you don't sell to companies, you sell to human beings, and like you don't pitch the venture capital firm, you pitch a particular partner, right? Or an Aaron Perman at the venture capital firm. And so like we're all going through this shit right now. And so I think just being very upfront if you have something to say about it, or also why has that made your business or what you're doing more bulletproof or more attractive? Because you've been able to accomplish all of this, right, with whatever limited resources or not seeing one another. Like there are other ways to spin that, but we're all in this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, in some ways, I almost see it as a non-issue. And so if it comes up in conversation, there's no reason to hide it. But like, I don't feel like if you're talking to a customer, focus on how you're going to help solve their problem. And unless they ask, have you guys ever met each other, it comes up naturally. Like, I don't think it's something you have to like disclose or anything.
Awesome, thanks.
If I can add something simple, I mean, as you said, people do business with people, and what makes me trust you. So if you listen to what their flashpoints are, you can find out pretty quickly if they're worried about you never having people in the office. Okay, well, then you address it appropriately. But otherwise, as I said, stick to the problem and the issues, and gain the trust.
Thanks. Great answers. Love it.
So I know there's going to be, I could talk about business all day, but I want to be cognizant of people's times. Is that do you want to have any other thoughts, Elashu?
No, I was just going to thank you guys. Thank you so much for doing this for us, Steve and Aaron and JD. And thank you guys all for coming and participating so enthusiastically.